Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to Mag 3, and it's time for the judge commentary on the last couple of stages we just played through. Starting with 124th place, Chaos Light City by Anti-Parallel. This stage got a 44.6, with a 2.6 in difficulty, 13.8 in design, 7.6 in fun, 7.4 in creativity, 8.4 in aesthetics, and 7.4 in functionality. Mick. Oh my word, please quit it with all the shields. Seriously though, I'm pretty sure every enemy in here is shielded, and Chaos Light City has a tendency to overcrowd its rooms with souped-up, stronger shielded enemies than normal. This means Laser Trident is the go-to weapon for the player because the alternative is an exercise in frustration, and that presents a huge problem for the level design. The idea of turning off streetlights to remove invincibility is neat. It's an idea I could get behind in another level. There's even a spot where one of the lights is keeping a Sniper Joe from chasing you, meaning turning it off actually hampers you. The kind of clever scenario I wish there was more of. Unfortunately, the level instead chooses to pivot towards lights that you just can't turn off, which only works in tandem with the Cyber Gabules. Making matters worse, Laser Trident's ability to pierce shields includes the light shields, so it completely defeats the gimmick. And since the enemies here are already shielded, aka the exact sort of enemies you'd already use Laser Trident against, the core gimmick becomes self-defeating and might as well not be there at all. All you have left after that is a complete slog. Okay, so from the sounds of it, this is one of those where I trusted the gimmick too much. They told me that when the light was on, enemies were invincible. I didn't think to question that, and apparently the gimmick is a no-sell against Laser Trident. Though it still didn't do anything against the Gabules, though I'm not sure if they normally do. I'm honestly not sure what, if anything, does take those out, because yeah, those segments, those got frustrating for me. They're just so fast, invincible, can't even be stopped like the original Spine, and they're on such tiny platforms. I tried a couple of weapons, didn't get any results, lost patience, and just kind of tanked my way through those areas. That wasn't the most fun part of the stage, but anyway. I really only have one big piece of advice. Reevaluate the enemy selection from top to bottom, because this wasn't fun, nor was it very interesting. And disabling Laser Trident wouldn't have helped at all. Then it'd be extra aggravating instead of just frustratingly boring. Part of me wants to like this place as there was clear effort put in, but the rest of me is too frustrated and bored to give it that luxury. Shinryu. There's a decent idea in all this, but sadly it's buried beneath a number of problems that ultimately make this a very flawed stage. The biggest issue here is the enemy placement. Simply put, they're set up in such a way that they're more of a nuisance than anything. The worst offenders are the Cyber Gabules, as they not only tend to be grouped on small platforms, but they also move faster when exposed to light. That being said, I can't say I dislike the gist of what the level is going for. The main gimmick of having the lights affect enemies in various ways is pretty interesting. I just wish it was used to do more than make already shielded enemies invincible and speed up enemies in small spaces. Thanks to how tedious all the enemies were to deal with, I ended up using Laser Trident and Thunder Beam to plow through everything, which basically rendered the gimmick pointless, since the light effect doesn't protect them from piercing weapons. Wonder if Thunder Beam would have worked. While we're on the subject of weapons, there was a dev kit related issue with Tornado Blow and the main gimmick that severely broke the stage for me. I assumed it was an entry issue at first because of other oddities, such as Rush's teleport being able to activate the light switches. Wait, what? So Rush beaming in can affect the light switches. That's that's kind of amazing. Along with the music not looping correctly. These are relatively minor when compared to the stage's other issues, though. That aside, the only other major noteworthy thing here are the aesthetics. While the searchlight effect in the background is somewhat neat, I'm really not a fan of the gray and red color scheme. There's not much more to talk about here, even when it comes to the mid-boss, who is just a big eye that gets occasionally shielded by the lights. I wonder if Laser Trident would have worked on that, too. And the ending, which is a complete anticlimax. Like I said at the start of the review, there's a good idea here, but the execution was flawed due to an overabundance of shielded enemies and tight spaces. Patchy. Betrayal by light. Pretty interesting gimmick here where the enemies become invulnerable if they are shined by a light, and you often need to toggle the light off in order to make them vulnerable again. There is just one major demerit. There are way too many shielded enemies, which really halts the flow of the stage, and the lights only serve to pad out the tedium. It doesn't help that there are quite a few instances where you can't manipulate the light settings either. Poor use of the spines. Their sudden speed-ups are very hard to parse overall. They also can get off-sync by player proximity, leaving no room to maneuver safely most of the time. On successive playthroughs, it turns out I didn't realize that the light is what was causing their sudden speed increases, which seems like a poor conveyance on the level design part when the player couldn't immediately recognize what's going on. A room with fake pits that hide the token. Odd design there. Said room also has little gaps between the pillar objects where you can't jump out of without tornado blow. Oops. Yeah, found that one. Flashman 85. It's a simple gimmick, but a very clever one, and the level does a satisfactory job of exploring its potential. Timing and sequencing puzzles are the right way to go. Big Eye is a great choice for mini-boss. Inherently shielded enemies are, well, the worst possible choice for this level, but at least they don't disrupt the pacing. Theming is on point, with shadowy enemies, admittedly a bit too shadowy, against an exciting backdrop of animated lights surrounded by neutral-colored architecture that looks nice without pulling focus from the action. It feels like a lot of thought went into this level, or at least certain aspects of it. However, it doesn't feel like there was a lot of playtesting. Directionality gets fuzzy around the first one-up screen. A player can easily get stuck between pillars on the screen above the token. The otherwise perfect music doesn't loop correctly. As much fun as it is to turn off lights with Rush Coil, the main gimmick doesn't properly account for special weapon use. There are so many oversights that the player could conceivably reach the end without ever realizing the lights are more than decoration. And special weapons are essential because most challenges are so cramped, overcrowded, or precision-driven that it's unreasonably difficult to avoid damage without them. I get the sense that this level knows the basic tenets of good game design, but not how best to apply them. New elements are introduced in a way that could be appropriate if the player thinks and plays exactly as intended. Gimmick complexity keeps increasing, yet the difficulty remains constant because there's usually too much going on. Power-ups and checkpoints are abundant, but haphazard. The level ends after an acceptable number of screens, but without a climax that gives the ending a sense of accomplishment. I'd love to play a revised version. Good ideas and great atmosphere make this a level worth updating. And A-Spark. The stage has a neat idea, but the enemy selection really lets it down. Having a gimmick that makes enemies invulnerable would be cool with more mobile, weaker enemies. However, every enemy in this stage is armored in some fashion, making it difficult and frustrating to kill them. For such a short stage, there was an awful lot of waiting around. The fact that enemies were so generic also hurt the personality of the stage. The stage is well tiled and flashy, making for a decent atmosphere. Unfortunately, both the background and almost all of the enemies were very dark, similar colors, making for a very monochromatic stage. It also made it very difficult to spot some of the enemies, especially the metals. There are a couple of very obnoxious rooms in the level. The room before the Big Eye was extremely difficult to pass, as the shot pattern often synced up, where the shield attacker would block shots when the other enemies were vulnerable. Yeah, I think I was kinda noticing that. There were two rooms with gabules underneath lights that were nearly impossible to get through with taking damage. Finally, there were two rooms combining the Tatabo and Joe enemies with the Sniper Joe invulnerable. These took ages standing in one place and were incredibly annoying. So, yeah, overall I think this stage was hurt by basically the entire cast of enemies being shield enemies. It is something that, especially in a lot of the earlier stages here, there is definite Sniper Joe abuse. They are everywhere. It is an epidemic of Sniper Joes. And in a stage like this where the gimmick is extra shielding, they really didn't need that. Because it is, overall, a very short stage. But due to most of the enemies just being invincible for long periods and forcing you to just kind of hurry up and wait, the stage did feel a lot longer than it really was. I do agree that it is an interesting gimmick that could probably be put to better use than it was here, so I would again like to see this stage revisited, revamped, updated, and the gimmick perhaps used on more suitable enemies than it was here. And yeah, more maneuvering room around the gabules, please. That was a bit of a thing. So now moving on to 123rd place, Mediocre Oil Level by Wistful Quent. 44.8, with a 2.2 in difficulty, 15.6 in design, 11.2 in fun, 6.0 in creativity, 3.8 in aesthetics, and 8.2 in functionality. Mick. A name that's designed to create instant negative bias, the beta tileset is a primary visual, several unnecessary apologies, and a broken Proto-Man to the left that gives the player nothing. This has a very bad first impression, and it doesn't really improve. I like the enemy set. Kyoron and PU oil is a surprisingly good combination. Oh, powered up oil. I also appreciate that both oils are introduced well, and I'll admit the powered up oil was much less annoying here than normal. Considering it tends to be combined with instant death magma lasers, that's honestly an achievement. Unfortunately, there's precious little about this place that I'd call memorable. The only parts that stick out are the oil magma hall, Fankuro, and the boss fights. The oil magma hall because it's kinda tedious, although Jump's cameo is appreciated, and Rush Bike can totally trivialize the challenge there. Fankuro sticks out because he's unexpected and frankly rather cheap. The boss fights actually try to do different things, and I'll give Chenki Dragon credit for the respawning oil. However, while it's funny to see Oil Man getting stuck under those small platforms, his fight also really doesn't work here. All in all, I don't have a lot to say here. There's not much going on, and what does happen still doesn't offer very much. I suppose I'd appreciate seeing a level that isn't designed to set the panel against it from the get-go. Shinryu. Well, I appreciate your honesty, even though I think you're being a bit harsh on yourself. I do agree that it's not a good stage, but it's still not the worst I've played. The thing is, I can see glimmers of good design in this level when it comes to some of the enemy and gimmick placements. There's a few rooms where they actually complement each other rather well. The corridor with the magma generators and the Kyorons comes to mind. Unfortunately, this doesn't really make up for the rest of the stage's issues. The lacking aesthetics, the level itself being way too short, and several uninteresting rooms in between the more unique ones. It all drags the stage down to be a subpar, mostly forgettable experience. Yes, I realize I just more or less reiterated the level's title, but I get the feeling that making a mediocre level wasn't the original intent here. Unless it was, in which case, more power to you, I guess? Patchy. Mediocre, more like, hee hee. I approve. Well, mediocre is certainly not inaccurate, though honestly I've seen more mediocre levels in this contest. The stage is not bad. I quite like the small hallway where you have to precision yourself in between the magma lasers, cleverly using the tile set to indicate the safe spot. Yeah, I just kind of sped through those. I did not trust myself to find just the right hitbox to sneak between the lasers. Honestly, even as familiar as I am with Mega Man's hitbox, I don't know that I would have trusted even having the original sprite rather than a custom costume. Could have used an extra checkpoint here and there, but nothing too unreasonable. The powered-up oil is a risky gimmick that could be used in real evil ways, but thankfully the challenges here are merciful and manageable enough. Until the Oil Man fight, anyway. The fight is a bit of a mess. The extra platforms you could use as shelter from the oil shots also can limit your movement severely while oil gets filled up everywhere. Needless to say, it makes the fight into this really awkward situation where you're stuck in an oil-filled corner while Oil Man spends most of his time on top of a wall away from your attacks. Also, you might want to replace some of the BG basic tiles next time. They're supposed to be a placeholder after all. Flashman85. Honestly, if the rest of the level looked as decent as the last few screens do, and I can tell you tried, I wouldn't be talking to you for at least another tier. Mediocre drastically undersells this level. If the text boxes are to be believed, this level was a rush job. Graphics aside, it barely shows. I see a sensible number of reasonable challenges, arranged mostly in ascending order of difficulty, with checkpoints and power-ups and breathers at regular intervals. If that isn't the basis for a good Mega Man level, I don't know what is. The initial learning curve is thoughtful. The architecture and screen transitions make sense. The screen count is thoroughly acceptable. Not only is there an obvious theme, but the presence of an ink-throwing octopus in an oil level means you were thinking outside the box. Asset combinations are unique and exciting. For once, I don't hate Oil Man, or that stupid crow, or the jump sign, which is surprisingly helpful. It actually is, since as soon as it goes off, you get shot from off-screen by one of the crows. And that whole laser corridor is the best part of the level. This is the first time I have ever enjoyed the use of oil slicks. I cannot tell you how happy it makes me when things I despise turn into things I enjoy. I can put up with choppy pacing and uneven challenge quality. That one showboating laser and the fall off the ladder challenge come to mind. I'll take unrestrained generosity over power-up deprivation any day. The little oversights are forgivable. I don't mind getting stuck in a wall when Proto Man is delivering the kind of absurd comedy I love. Normally, I'm bothered by text boxes that break the fourth wall, but this time they tell a story that provides necessary context. You know what I want most, graphics aside? I want lasers to set oil puddles on fire. If that's the biggest disappointment, then you've done alright. Okay, Flashman, we need to talk. I do not want that. I absolutely do not want that. Oh, no. No. If it's just damaging fire, maybe, but if it is instant death fire, not so much. Wrong button. I had opinions there. Complete derailment. Okay, anyway, finally, A Spark. It is a shame that this level feels so unfinished, as it definitely has some good ideas going for it. Up until the final section, the oil gimmick builds up on the basics and manages to provide some interesting challenges for the player. This is finally seen in the narrow corridor, which requires some finesse and timing to get through, and needs the player to have properly learned how the oil gimmick works. Thankfully, the level teaches this well along the way. The magma beams were mostly okay to good, but the one beam that lasted for an ice age felt a bit odd. Yeah, that was weird. Unfortunately, the final third of the level seems completely out of place, with a rather useless drop, new complex enemies introduced without warning, and the fight against Oilman was awful. The AI of the boss broke completely, and the floor being covered in oil means that fighting Oilman traditionally is impossible. It is a damage race, even with his weakness. Removing some of the oil from the room might have made this a more interesting encounter, though with the very buggy AI, I cannot be sure. This entire last section needed to be rethought. The other two mini-bosses were definitely positives in the level. The Suzak and Phoenix fight has just enough changes to feel threatening, and the layout of the room means the fight is over quickly. The Chankey Dragon's new layout is difficult but learnable, and was satisfying to defeat. The graphics in the level were nearly non-existent. With no background, and even using the placeholder tile set, there were misplaced tiles and cutoffs. This looked more like an alpha build than something that should have been submitted. There is clearly some design effort and potential in this level, but there needed to be a bit more time put in the polish and testing to make it a really good one. So yeah, overall I think this is one of those where, despite the name, it actually does have some thought put into it, just needed that extra bit of polish. And, you know, a more defined tile set. I honestly have to wonder how much using more focused tiles instead of the default ones would have boosted the score. I don't really know how much aesthetics really factors into stuff, how people would have scored it otherwise. If the stage was exactly the same just with different graphics, I do kind of wonder how much that would have boosted things. But overall, yeah, I found this stage pretty interesting. Honestly, the one bummer for me was definitely the Oilman fight, because, yeah, I mean, it certainly delivered on the oil, but to an excessive degree that, honestly, was not super fun. It was easy to get trapped in just this chain of, I've taken damage, I'm panicking a bit, I'm badly positioned, I need to get out of here, and mistiming things to where I slipped instead of jumping and then moving. So, yeah, it was an awkward fight to be sure, and Oilman getting trapped under the platforms, while hilarious, did make things even more awkward. But overall, not a bad stage. I didn't really have a bad time with this one overall. But with that, that's where we're going to call it for now. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well.
Try again.
I said fare thee well. We're done here, Ignite.